Remember your grandmother's pantry? 50 staples sat on those shelves between 1929 and 1939.
You know, back then, between 1929 and 39, this little pantry was our whole world.
Foods that cost pennies but kept families alive. These weren't ingredients. They were love disguised as survival.
Did you ever have to make a meal in 20 minutes, literally from the time you entered the kitchen until the meal was ready to serve?
Today, we've forgotten what grandmothers knew by heart. Number 14 will bring tears. We're bringing them back now. Walk into any Depression kitchen and you'd find jars of dried beans lining the shelves. Navy beans, pinto beans, lima beans, whatever was cheapest that week. 10 cents bought a pound that would feed a family for 3 days. But listen to what made beans miraculous. They never spoiled, ever. A mother could buy beans in July and eat them in February. That reliability was priceless when nothing else was reliable. Every night, Depression mothers would put beans to soak. Why? Because tomorrow's dinner started tonight. That planning, that thinking ahead, separated families who survived from families who didn't. A 5-pound bag of cornmeal cost 15 cents and sat in every Depression kitchen. Why cornmeal instead of just flour? Because cornmeal was cheaper and more filling. It made cornbread that stuck to your ribs. It made mush that kept you full until lunch. But here's what nobody tells you. Cornmeal also made Depression children's teeth yellow. The constant cornmeal diet stained teeth. Dentists in the 1930s could identify Depression children by their teeth. That yellow tint was the color of survival. A large container of rolled oats cost 35 cents and provided breakfast for a month. Every morning, the same breakfast. Oatmeal cooked in water, maybe a bit of sugar if you had it. Usually just salt. One woman who grew up during the Depression said she ate oatmeal every single morning for 6 years. Same bowl, same taste, same reminder that nothing had changed. But oats did something important. They provided energy that lasted. Children who ate oatmeal could make it to lunch without collapsing. Here's something modern kitchens don't have. A 5-pound tin of lard sitting in the cupboard. In the Depression, every kitchen had one. Cost 40 cents. That tin was used for everything. Frying eggs, making biscuits, greasing pans, even spreading on bread when butter was impossible. Lard lasted forever without refrigeration. It didn't go rancid. But here's the secret. Depression mothers knew lard made the flakiest pie crusts. Better than butter, better than shortening. Poverty created the best pie crusts in American history. A 5-pound bag of rice cost 18 cents and provided the foundation for dozens of meals. Rice with beans, rice with milk and sugar, rice with whatever vegetables you had. Rice stretched everything. But what made rice valuable? It was bland. That blandness meant it paired with anything. Sweet or savory, breakfast or dinner, rice adapted. And adaptation was survival. Question for you. How many of these pantry staples does your kitchen have right now? Drop a number in the comments. A jar of molasses cost 12 cents and provided sweetness cheaper than sugar. Mothers drizzled it over oatmeal, cornbread, biscuits, anything that needed sweetening. But molasses did something sugar couldn't. It provided iron. Depression children were anemic from poor diets. Molasses helped. Not much, but some. And some was better than none. The thick, dark syrup also created treats. Molasses cookies became the dessert of the Depression. A small can of baking powder cost 10 cents and lasted 3 months. Why does this matter? Because baking powder meant you could make bread without yeast. Yeast required time, warmth, careful attention. Baking powder just required mixing. When you're exhausted from worry, from hunger, from trying to keep your family together, quick bread beats slow bread every time. Fresh milk cost too much for daily use, so mothers bought powdered milk. One box cost 25 cents and made the equivalent of 10 quarts. The math worked. But the taste, children hated it. It tasted wrong, felt wrong, was wrong, but it provided calcium and protein that growing bodies needed. So mothers made it anyway, ignoring complaints, knowing that nutrition mattered more than preference. Here it is, number 14, the can of bacon grease sitting beside every depression stove. When you fried bacon, rare luxury, you saved every drop of grease. That grease became cooking fat for a week. It fried eggs, it seasoned green beans, it made cornbread taste rich. It greased baking pans. One slice of bacon, properly saved, could flavor a dozen meals. Nothing was wasted, not even the fat left in a pan. A can of tomatoes cost 8 cents and turned beans into something worth eating. Tomatoes added acidity, flavor, moisture to dishes that were otherwise dry and bland. But canned tomatoes did something else. They provided vitamins. Specifically, vitamin C. Scurvy was a real threat during the Depression when fresh fruits were impossible. Canned tomatoes prevented it. Those 8-cent cans saved teeth, prevented bleeding gums, kept families healthy enough to keep fighting. Split peas cost 7 cents a pound and cooked faster than beans. That speed saved fuel. When you're counting pennies for coal or wood to heat your stove, cook time matters. Split pea soup became a Depression staple because it was fast, cheap, filling. The peas would break down while cooking, creating thick soup that felt substantial. A bottle of vinegar cost 8 cents and had 50 uses: cooking, cleaning, preserving, medicine. That multi-purpose value made it essential. In cooking, vinegar replaced expensive lemon juice. In cleaning, it replaced expensive cleaning products. In preserving, it made pickles that lasted all winter. One bottle, 8 cents, 50 uses. Canned evaporated milk cost 10 cents and lasted forever on the shelf. No refrigeration needed, no spoilage, just thick, concentrated milk ready to be diluted with water whenever you needed it. 1 can equaled 2 cups of regular milk. The math worked. The taste was different, metallic, slightly sweet. But it worked in cooking, in baking, in coffee when you wanted richness. Day-old bread cost half price, 3 cents a loaf instead of 6. Depression, mothers bought day-old bread exclusively. Was it as soft as fresh? No. Did it work? Yes. Toast it and you couldn't tell the difference. Use it for bread pudding, and it was actually better. Stale bread absorbed custard better than fresh. That 3-cent savings meant the difference between having bread and not having bread. A jar of peanut butter cost 23 cents and provided protein that meat couldn't. 1 jar could make 30 sandwiches. That's less than a penny per sandwich. The math made sense. The nutrition made sense. The fact that children would actually eat it, that made it priceless. Peanut butter didn't require cooking, didn't require refrigeration, didn't require anything except bread and a knife. Think you've seen everything? The next 9 staples get even more essential. And number 28, it was in every Depression pantry. A head of cabbage cost 3 cents and provided vegetables for a week. Raw in salads, boiled in soup, fried with onions. Cabbage appeared in multiple forms, providing the illusion of variety when there was none. But cabbage did something important. It prevented scurvy. Like tomatoes, cabbage provided vitamin C that Depression diets lacked. Those 3-cent heads of cabbage saved teeth, prevented disease, kept families functional. Carrots cost 2 cents a pound and added color to plates that were otherwise beige. That color mattered psychologically. Food that looks good tastes better. Carrots made Depression meals look less depressing. But carrots also provided vitamin A for vision, for immune function, for keeping children healthy. And children would eat them raw as snacks, making carrots one of the few vegetables that didn't require cooking fuel. 30 cents a dozen, but mothers bought them when possible because eggs were miracle ingredients. Scrambled for breakfast, hard-boiled for lunch, baked into cakes for special occasions. One egg could be stretched to feed 4 people when scrambled with potatoes. Remember those potatoes from earlier? This is how you made them feel more substantial. But eggs represented something else, connection to better times. During harvest season, apples cost 50 cents for a bushel, about 40 apples. Mothers bought bushels and stored them in cool cellars where they'd last for months. Those apples became sauce, became fried apples, became pie filling, became snacks. One bushel provided fruit through winter when other fresh fruit was impossible. But apples required storage space, required cool temperatures, required planning. A box of crackers cost 12 cents and lasted 2 weeks. Crackers with soup made soup feel more substantial. Crackers with peanut butter became lunch. Crackers crushed into crumbs became breading for frying. That versatility earned crackers their place in Depression pantries. But crackers also provided something important. They required no preparation. When you're too tired to cook, when fuel is too expensive, when you just need something now, crackers delivered. Cheese was expensive, 18 cents a pound, but mothers bought small amounts because cheese added protein and flavor that made other foods tolerable. A quarter pound of cheese, grated carefully, could flavor macaroni for the whole family. That quarter pound, stretched properly, lasted a week. The key was stretching. Grate it fine, use it sparingly, make it last. A box of macaroni cost 9 cents, and children would actually eat it. That willingness to eat without complaint made macaroni worth every penny. Boiled macaroni with butter if you had it, with cheese if you could afford it, with salt if that's all there was. Macaroni adapted to whatever you had, making it perfect for Depression cooking. But macaroni did something else. It reminded children of better times. Coffee was expensive, 30 cents a pound, but mothers bought it anyway. Why spend money on coffee when children needed food? Because coffee represented normalcy. That morning, Cup said, "We're still civilized, still maintaining routines, still human despite everything." Coffee provided structure to days that otherwise felt chaotic. My grandmother used to say, "As long as we have coffee, we haven't lost everything." She meant it. A can of soup cost 10 cents and saved time when time was as scarce as money. Yes, homemade soup was cheaper, but homemade soup required hours of simmering, required fuel, required energy that exhausted mothers didn't have. Canned soup, heat, and eat. That simplicity was worth the extra cost when you were too tired to stand, too worried to think, too broken to care. We're at 30 staples. If you're still watching, comment Pantry and tell me which of these your grandmother always had. Cost 15 cents a pound. Prunes cost 12 cents. Dried apples cost 10 cents. These dried fruits provided sweetness year-round without refrigeration. They went into cookies, into oatmeal, into children's lunchboxes as treats. But dried fruit did something important. It prevented constipation. Depression diets were heavy on starches, light on fiber. Dried fruit provided that fiber, not glamorous, but necessary. A can of vegetable shortening cost 35 cents and lasted 3 months. Shortening made biscuits, pie crusts, fried foods. It was cheaper than butter and lasted longer than lard. That economy made it essential, but shortening was also neutral flavored, meaning it worked in both sweet and savory applications. That versatility meant one can did everything. A can of corn cost 7 cents, and children would eat it without fighting. That alone made it worth buying. The sweetness of corn made it appealing when other vegetables were rejected. Mothers would mix corn with other foods to make them more acceptable. Remember those beans and that rice? Corn made them both better. That ability to improve other foods made corn valuable beyond its own nutritional contribution. Plain soda crackers cost 8 cents a box and were even cheaper than regular crackers. They went into soup, became breading, became snacks. Their blandness was actually an advantage. They paired with everything, sweet or savory, soup or salad. Soda crackers adapted, but soda crackers also settled upset stomachs. When hunger caused nausea, when stress caused digestive problems, soda crackers helped. Made when fruit was cheap during harvest, provided sweetness through winter. One batch of jam, costing about 50 cents for fruit and sugar, made dozens of jars. Those jars lined pantry shelves like sweet insurance policies. Jam on bread made bread special. Jam in oatmeal made oatmeal tolerable. Jam represented planning ahead, thinking seasonally, making summer abundance last through winter scarcity. The next section? These are the staples that separated families who survived from families who struggled. Pay attention. Turnips cost 1 cent a pound and nobody liked them. But turnips grew in poor soil, stored for months, and provided vegetables when nothing else would. That reliability trumped preference. Children complained about turnips. Adults tolerated them. Everyone ate them because the alternative was no vegetables at all. Turnips represented the Depression compromise. It's not what you want, but it's what you get. A box of gelatin cost 8 cents and created desserts that looked fancy despite costing nothing. Gelatin with canned fruit became molded salad. Gelatin with juice became dessert. That ability to look impressive while being cheap made gelatin perfect for Depression entertaining. When neighbors visited, when you wanted to maintain appearances, gelatin delivered. It said, "We're doing fine," even when you weren't. Canned salmon was expensive, 25 cents a can, but mothers bought it occasionally because salmon provided protein and omega-3s that other cheap foods didn't. 1 can, mixed with potatoes, made salmon cakes that fed the family. That can, stretched properly, was worth its cost, but canned salmon represented something else. It was special, not everyday food, special occasion food. A tin of cocoa powder cost 20 cents and made chocolate possible when chocolate bars were impossible. Cocoa in cakes, cocoa in cookies. Cocoa mixed with hot milk for treats. That tin represented small luxuries that kept morale up. Children who got cocoa felt loved. Mothers who provided cocoa felt capable. That emotional value was worth every penny. A can of peas cost 6 cents and was the vegetable children would actually eat. That willingness made peas worth buying. Mothers didn't have energy to fight vegetable battles. Canned peas avoided those fights. The peas were soft, sweet, small enough to eat without cutting. Everything about them was child-friendly. By 1935, canned peas were in 68% of American pantries. A small bottle of vanilla extract cost 15 cents and lasted a year. Those few drops transformed plain cakes into something special. Vanilla in cookies made them taste expensive. Vanilla in pudding made it taste rich. That flavor enhancement was worth the cost because it made cheap ingredients taste less cheap. And tasting less cheap mattered when everything reminded you of poverty. Question: which of these staples is still in your pantry today? Comment the name. I bet it's one of these next 10. A box of bouillon cubes cost 10 cents and created broth without bones. 1 cube in hot water became soup base. That instant, broth saved time and fuel. No simmering for hours. Just dissolve and use. That speed and convenience made bouillon cubes worth their cost when time and fuel were both scarce. A can of green beans cost 7 cents and provided vegetables that required no preparation. Open, heat, eat. That simplicity mattered when mothers were exhausted. Green beans with bacon grease, remember that can beside the stove, became a side dish. Green beans in soup became vegetable soup. 1 can, multiple uses. A tin of nutmeg cost 12 cents and lasted 5 years. Those few grates added warmth to simple desserts. Nutmeg in rice pudding made it taste special. Nutmeg in simple cookies made them taste expensive. That flavor transformation was worth 12 cents spread over 5 years. Sometimes the smallest additions make the biggest difference. A can of beets cost 8 cents and added color to plates that were otherwise beige. That color made meals look less depressing. Beets were sweet, which made them more appealing than other vegetables. But beets also provided iron that depression diets lacked. That nutritional value made them worth buying even when nobody particularly wanted to eat them. Look at a Depression-era dinner plate. Boiled potatoes, beige. Bread, beige. Beans, beige. Gravy, beige. Everything was the same monotonous color, the same uninspiring appearance. Food that looks depressing tastes more depressing. Food that looks appealing tastes better even when the ingredients are identical. Depression mothers understood this psychological reality, and canned beets became their solution to the beige problem. Open a can of beets, and suddenly that beige plate had a splash of deep crimson. That bright color changed everything about the meal's appearance. The plate looked more abundant, more varied, more like a real dinner instead of survival food. That visual transformation mattered more than you might think. When every day felt gray and hopeless, when circumstances seemed endlessly bleak, having something bright on your dinner plate provided a small psychological boost that helped people keep going. The color of beets did something else. It disguised the monotony. Even though the family might be eating potatoes and beans for the 5th night in a row, the presence of beets made it look different, made it feel different. That illusion of variety was valuable when actual variety was impossible to afford. Depression mothers became experts at creating the appearance of abundance through small touches like a serving of bright red beets beside the same old potatoes. But beets weren't just about appearance. They had a distinctive sweet flavor that set them apart from other vegetables. Most depression vegetables were either bland or bitter. Potatoes were starchy and plain. Cabbage was harsh and sulphurous. Turnips were sharp and unpleasant. Beets were different. They were sweet, almost like candy compared to other vegetables. That sweetness made them more appealing, especially to children who were tired of eating bitter greens and bland starches. The sweetness of beets meant they could bridge the gap between vegetables and dessert. Some mothers would serve beets as a side dish at dinner, but others would save them for after the meal, presenting them as a sweet treat when actual dessert was impossible. A few slices of sweet beets felt like something special, something indulgent, even though they came from an 8-cent can. That psychological value, making children feel like they'd gotten a treat, was worth the cost. Canned beets also had genuine nutritional value that made them essential despite their cost. Depression diets were dangerously low in iron. Families eating mostly potatoes, beans, and bread weren't getting enough iron to maintain healthy blood. That iron deficiency led to anemia, which caused weakness, fatigue, and increased susceptibility to illness. Families couldn't afford to be weak or sick. There was no safety net, no sick leave, no health insurance. Staying healthy was survival. Beets provided iron in a form that bodies could actually absorb and use. One serving of canned beets contained nearly 10% of daily iron needs. For families eating beets several times a week, that added up to significant iron intake that helped prevent anemia. Depression mothers might not have understood the biochemistry, but they understood that beets made their families feel stronger, more energetic, more capable of handling the physical demands of depression life. The canning process itself was important. Fresh beets required peeling, cooking, and careful preparation. They stained everything they touched: hands, cutting boards, clothes. They took time and fuel to prepare properly. Canned beets eliminated all of that. Open the can, Drain the liquid, serve. That convenience mattered when mothers were exhausted from worry and work, when fuel for cooking was expensive, when time itself felt like a luxury nobody could afford. A mother could buy several cans when she had money, knowing they'd be there when money ran out. That security, knowing you had food that wouldn't spoil, provided psychological comfort that went beyond the food itself. The 8-cent cost of canned beets positioned them as a considered purchase. They weren't as cheap as dried beans at 7 cents a pound, which provided multiple meals. They weren't as economical as potatoes at 75 cents for 50 pounds. 8 cents bought one can that provided maybe 3 or 4 servings. That cost-per-serving ratio meant beets were a luxury, relatively speaking. Families had to decide whether the color, the sweetness, the iron were worth 8 cents that could have been spent on more filling foods. Serving canned beets required strategy. The beets came packed in liquid, usually water with salt and sometimes vinegar. That liquid could be drained and discarded, or it could be saved and used. Some mothers would drink the beet liquid themselves, getting extra iron without taking food from their children. Others would add it to soups or use it to cook rice, infusing other foods with beet flavor and nutrition. Nothing was wasted. The beets themselves could be served cold straight from the can, or they could be heated. Some families preferred them cold, finding the chilled sweetness refreshing. Others heated them, sometimes adding a bit of butter if they had it, creating a warm side dish that felt more substantial. The sliced beets could be arranged attractively on a plate, or they could be chopped and mixed with other foods. That flexibility made them adaptable to different meals and preferences. Sorghum syrup cost 15 cents a jar and provided sweetness cheaper than molasses, drizzled over biscuits, mixed into oatmeal, used in baking. Sorghum had a distinctive flavor, slightly sour, less sweet than molasses. Some loved it, some tolerated it. Everyone used it because it was affordable. That affordability trumped preference every time. Sorghum syrup came from sorghum cane, a tall grass-like plant that grew well in southern and midwestern states. Farmers would harvest the cane in late summer, press out the juice, then boil it down into thick amber syrup. The process was labor-intensive, but produced a sweetener that was significantly cheaper than refined sugar or even molasses. That price difference made sorghum essential in Depression households where every penny mattered. The flavor of sorghum was polarizing. Unlike the deep, rich sweetness of molasses or the pure sweetness of sugar, sorghum had a complex taste that some people described as slightly sour, almost tangy. It was less intensely sweet than other options, with an earthy undertone that came from the cane itself. Children raised on sorghum either loved it with fierce loyalty or hated it with equal passion. There was rarely middle ground, but personal preference didn't matter during the Depression. What mattered was cost. A jar of sorghum cost 15 cents and lasted for weeks. The same amount of sweetness from sugar would have cost twice that. Molasses was slightly cheaper than sorghum. But sorghum was more readily available in many rural areas where it was produced locally. That local production meant families could sometimes buy directly from farmers, cutting out middlemen and reducing costs even further. Depression mothers used sorghum in countless ways. The most common was drizzling it over biscuits for breakfast. Hot biscuits split open, a pat of lard or butter if you had it, then a generous drizzle of sorghum. The syrup would soak into the warm biscuit, creating pockets of sweetness throughout. That combination, biscuit and sorghum, became a Depression breakfast staple, providing calories and energy to start the day. Sorghum also went into oatmeal, transforming plain cooked oats into something children would actually eat without complaint. A spoonful of sorghum stirred into hot oatmeal added sweetness and flavor that made the monotonous breakfast more palatable. Some mothers would add sorghum to cornmeal mush as well, using it to make another plain breakfast slightly more appealing. In baking, sorghum replaced sugar or molasses in recipes. Sorghum cookies became common, their distinctive flavor marking them as depression treats. The cookies were chewy, not too sweet, with that characteristic sorghum tang. Sorghum also went into gingerbread, where its complex flavor complemented the spices. Some mothers would use sorghum in pie fillings, particularly for sweet potato or pumpkin pies, where its earthiness worked well with the vegetables. The consistency of sorghum was thicker than honey, but thinner than molasses. It poured slowly, creating ribbons of amber liquid that would pool and spread. That thickness meant it coated foods well, clinging to biscuits and pancakes instead of running off immediately. Children learned to be patient when using sorghum, waiting for it to slowly drip from the jar onto their plates. Sorghum had regional significance that went beyond its practical uses. In the South, sorghum was traditional, part of food culture that predated the Depression. Southern families had been making and using sorghum for generations, and the Depression simply made that tradition more widespread and necessary. In the Midwest, sorghum gained popularity during the 1930s as families searched for affordable sweeteners. That regional spread meant sorghum became a marker of Depression-era food culture. The production of sorghum created community events in rural areas. Sorghum making was labor-intensive and required equipment that most families didn't own individually. Communities would gather for sorghum-making days, where farmers would bring their cane to a central mill. The cane would be pressed, the juice collected, and then boiled in large kettles over wood fires. The process took hours, with people taking turns stirring the boiling juice to prevent burning. These community sorghum-making events provided more than just syrup. They provided social connection during times when isolation was dangerous. Families would talk while working, sharing news, offering support, maintaining the bonds that held communities together. Children would play while adults worked, creating memories of cooperation and shared purpose. The finished syrup would be divided among the families who contributed cane, ensuring everyone had sweetener for the coming months. Sorghum also had medicinal uses in Depression households. Some people believed it helped with anemia because of its iron content. Others used it for coughs and colds, mixing it with warm water to create a soothing drink. Whether these remedies actually worked is debatable, but the belief in sorghum's healing properties added to its value in families who couldn't afford doctors or medicine. The distinctive taste of sorghum created strong memories for people who grew up during the Depression. Decades later, that taste could transport them back to childhood kitchens, to biscuits and syrup breakfasts, to the particular sweetness that marked those years. Some sought out sorghum as adults, wanting to recreate those flavors. Others avoided it, the taste too closely associated with hardship. Sorghum's affordability came with trade-offs. It didn't provide the pure sweetness that sugar did. It didn't have the rich depth that molasses offered. But it provided sweetness at a price Depression families could manage, and that made it valuable beyond its taste. The syrup represented the Depression compromise, not what you wanted, but what you could afford. Not your first choice, but the choice that made survival possible. Today, sorghum syrup has largely disappeared from American kitchens. It's occasionally found in specialty stores or at farmers' markets, marketed as artisanal or traditional. But it's no longer a pantry staple, no longer something every family keeps on hand. We've forgotten what our grandparents knew, that sorghum provided affordable sweetness when sugar was a luxury, that its distinctive flavor could make plain foods more palatable, that sometimes the best option isn't the one you prefer, but the one you can afford. But in Depression kitchens, sorghum was everywhere. In jars on pantry shelves, drizzled over breakfast biscuits, stirred into oatmeal, baked into cookies. It was the sweetness that families could afford, the flavor that marked depression meals, the syrup that proved survival didn't require perfection. Sorghum wasn't sugar. It wasn't molasses. It was something different, something distinctly depression, something that kept families fed and provided small moments of sweetness in years that offered very little. Canned sardines cost 12 cents and provided protein that stretched further than meat. One can on crackers fed the family lunch. Sardines mixed with potatoes became fish cakes. The strong flavor meant a little went a long way. But sardines were controversial. Some family members loved them, others refused them. That division created family drama over 12-cent cans of fish. A tin of cinnamon cost 10 cents and lasted 2 years. Cinnamon in oatmeal made it taste better. Cinnamon on toast made it feel special. Cinnamon in simple cakes made them taste like something from a bakery. That flavor enhancement was worth 10 cents spread over 2 years. Small investments, big returns. 10 cents doesn't sound like much. But during the Depression, 10 cents could buy a loaf of bread, a pound of dried beans, or 2 cans of vegetables. Spending 10 cents on something you couldn't eat by itself, something that provided no calories, no protein, no sustenance, that was a decision that required careful consideration. Yet Depression mothers bought cinnamon anyway, understanding that survival wasn't just about calories, it was also about making those calories bearable to eat. A small tin of ground cinnamon contained maybe 2 ounces of the spice. That doesn't sound like much, but cinnamon is potent. A quarter teaspoon was enough to flavor an entire pot of oatmeal. Half a teaspoon could transform a simple cake. A pinch sprinkled on toast created the illusion of a treat. Used sparingly, that 2-ounce tin could last a family 2 years, sometimes longer. That's less than half a cent per month for flavor that made monotonous foods more tolerable. The mathematics of cinnamon made it one of the best investments a Depression household could make. Compare it to sugar. 10 cents bought 2 pounds of sugar, which might last 2 weeks in a family that used it regularly. 10 cents of cinnamon lasted 2 years. The return on investment was extraordinary. That's why cinnamon appeared in Depression pantries even when other spices didn't. Children would eat it because they had to, not because they wanted to. Add a shake of cinnamon, and suddenly that same oatmeal had warmth, had complexity, had a flavor that made it worth eating. That transformation happened with less than a quarter teaspoon of spice, costing a fraction of a cent. The psychological impact of that flavor enhancement was significant. Children who ate cinnamon oatmeal started their days feeling like they'd had a real breakfast, not just survival food. That feeling mattered. It affected their energy, their mood, their ability to focus at school. Depression mothers understood this instinctively. Feeding bodies was important, but feeding spirits was important too. Cinnamon fed both. Cinnamon toast became a Depression treat that required almost nothing. Take a slice of bread, day-old bread usually, bought at half price. Toast it over the stove flame or in the oven if you were baking something else anyway. Spread it with a thin layer of lard or butter if you had any. Sprinkle it with a mixture of sugar and cinnamon. The result was something that felt indulgent, that tasted special, that children looked forward to even though it cost less than 2 cents to make. The combination of cinnamon and sugar created a flavor that was greater than the sum of its parts. The sweetness of the sugar was enhanced by the warmth of the cinnamon. The cinnamon's slight spiciness was balanced by the sugar's pure sweetness. Together, they created complexity that made simple toast feel like a deliberate treat rather than poverty food. That psychological distinction mattered enormously. Cinnamon also had cultural associations that made it valuable beyond its flavor. It was associated with holidays, with special occasions, with times of celebration. Using cinnamon in everyday foods brought a touch of that specialness to ordinary days. It said, "This meal matters," even when the meal was just oatmeal or toast. It maintained traditions and rituals that gave structure to lives that had lost most structure. The spice came from the bark of cinnamon trees grown in tropical climates far from Depression America. That exotic origin gave it a kind of romance, a connection to a wider world beyond the immediate struggles of daily survival. When a mother sprinkled cinnamon on her children's oatmeal, she was connecting them, however tenuously, to places where cinnamon trees grew, to the labor of harvesting and processing the bark, to global trade networks that continued functioning even as local economies collapsed. Cinnamon had staying power that other Depression foods lacked. While families stopped eating dandelion salad and water pie as soon as they could afford to, cinnamon remained in their pantries. It transitioned from necessity to preference, from survival tool to chosen ingredient. That transition marked it as genuinely valuable, not just economically necessary. The 10-cent tin of cinnamon also taught lessons about value and investment. It showed that sometimes spending money on something that doesn't provide immediate calories is still worthwhile. It demonstrated that quality of life matters, not just quantity of food. It proved that small investments in flavor and pleasure can have returns that far exceed their cost. Children who grew up with cinnamon in their Depression meals developed strong positive associations with the spice. Unlike many Depression foods that carried negative memories, cinnamon carried warmth and comfort. The smell of cinnamon could evoke feelings of being cared for, of mothers who did their best with almost nothing, of small pleasures in hard times. Today, cinnamon remains common in American kitchens, but we've forgotten its Depression significance. We use it casually, shaking it freely, not measuring carefully, replacing tins long before they're empty. We've lost the understanding that cinnamon was once a precious commodity, used sparingly, making every grain count. We've forgotten that 10 cents worth of cinnamon could last 2 years and make thousands of meals more bearable. But in Depression kitchens, that small tin of cinnamon was precious. It sat on the shelf alongside flour and salt, used carefully, making plain foods taste better, making hard lives slightly more bearable. It proved that sometimes the smallest things, a pinch of spice, a hint of warmth, a suggestion of sweetness, make the biggest difference. Cinnamon didn't fill stomachs, but it fed something equally important. It fed hope. And hope, during the Depression, was worth far more than 10 cents. Canned peaches. A can of peaches cost 15 cents and provided fruit when fresh fruit was impossible. Peaches as dessert, peaches in cobbler, peaches eaten straight from the can as treats. That versatility made them worth their cost. But canned peaches represented something else. They were special, not everyday food, company food. Having canned peaches meant you could still entertain. Lentils cost 6 cents a pound and cooked faster than beans. That speed saved fuel. Lentils in soup, lentils with rice, lentils as side dishes. They provided protein without the overnight soaking that beans required. That convenience made them valuable when time and fuel were both scarce. Quick protein had worth beyond its 6-cent price. 6 cents bought a pound of dried lentils, small, flat, lens-shaped legumes that came in various colors. Brown lentils were most common and cheapest. Green lentils cost slightly more. Red lentils, when you could find them, were the most expensive but cooked fastest of all. Most Depression families bought brown lentils because they were what the store stocked and what they could afford. That pound of lentils, when cooked, would expand to about 2.5 pounds of edible food. 1 pound could make enough soup to feed a family of 5 for a full day, or it could be stretched across multiple meals as a side dish. That meant planning ahead, remembering to soak the beans the night before, and keeping the stove burning for hours the next day. Lentils required none of that. They could go straight from the pantry into the pot. No soaking needed, Within 30 to 40 minutes, they'd be fully cooked and ready to eat. That time, savings translated directly into fuel savings. Coal cost money. Wood had to be chopped or purchased. Every minute the stove burned was a minute of fuel being consumed. Lentils that cooked in 40 minutes used a fraction of the fuel that beans required. For families counting every penny spent on heating and cooking, that fuel efficiency made lentils worth buying even when beans were slightly cheaper per pound. The convenience factor extended beyond just cooking time. Lentils were more forgiving than beans. Overcook beans and they'd turn mushy, falling apart into an unappetizing mush. Overcook lentils and they'd still be edible, just softer. That margin for error mattered when mothers were exhausted, distracted by crying children, worried about money, trying to cook while managing a dozen other tasks. Lentils didn't require constant attention. They were reliable. Lentils also had versatility that made them valuable in depression cooking. They could be the main ingredient in soup, simmered with water, salt, and whatever vegetables were available. They could be cooked and served as a side dish, similar to how families served beans. They could be mixed with rice to create a complete protein, providing all the amino acids bodies needed when meat was out of reach. That combination, lentils and rice, became a depression staple in households that understood nutrition. Neither lentils nor rice alone provided complete protein, but together they complemented each other, creating a protein profile similar to meat. Depression mothers might not have understood the biochemistry of amino acids, but they understood that families eating lentils and rice together seemed healthier, stronger, more energetic than families eating either one alone. The texture of cooked lentils was different from beans. Beans were creamy inside, with skins that sometimes slipped off during cooking. Lentils maintained more structure, staying somewhat firm even when fully cooked. That texture made them suitable for different dishes than beans. Lentil soup had body and substance without being thick and heavy. Lentils as a side dish had enough texture to be interesting without being mushy. The mild flavor of lentils was both advantage and disadvantage. Unlike beans, which had distinctive flavors, lentils tasted fairly neutral. That neutrality meant they took on the flavors of whatever they were cooked with: onions, salt, vinegar, whatever seasonings the family could spare. But it also meant they were somewhat boring on their own. Children who complained about eating beans often complained about lentils, too, though usually less vehemently. Lentils stored as well as beans, which was crucial for depression pantries. A bag of dried lentils could sit on a shelf for months, even years, without spoiling. They didn't require refrigeration. They didn't attract insects as readily as flour did. They were stable, reliable, always ready when needed. A box of baking soda cost 5 cents and had 20 uses. Baking, cleaning, deodorizing, medicine, that multi-purpose value made it essential. One box did everything. 5 cents bought versatility that no other product could match. And versatility was survival when you couldn't afford specialized products for specialized tasks. A can of canned spaghetti cost 12 cents, and children loved it. That love made it worth every penny. Open, heat, eat. No preparation, no fuss, just food that children would eat without fighting. That piece was worth 12 cents. When you're exhausted from worry, from hunger, from trying to keep everything together, paying 12 cents to avoid dinner battles seems like a bargain. A box of cornstarch cost 8 cents and thickened everything. Thin soup became thick soup. Watery gravy became real gravy. Fruit juice became pudding. That thickening power made small amounts of food seem like more. A can of spinach cost 9 cents and provided iron that depression diets lacked. Children hated it. Mothers insisted on it. The battle was worth fighting because iron mattered. Anemia was real. Weakness was dangerous. A bag of pearl barley cost 10 cents and stretched soup further than anything else. Barley absorbed liquid and swelled, making thin soup seem thick. That thickening ability made it valuable. But barley also provided texture that made soup more interesting, more filling, more satisfying. That psychological satisfaction was worth 10 cents. Pearl barley got its name from the polishing process that removed the outer hull, leaving small, round, pearl-like grains. That polishing made it cook faster than whole barley and gave it a more appealing appearance. A 10-cent bag contained about a pound of these small white grains, enough to transform dozens of pots of soup from thin and disappointing into thick and satisfying. The magic of barley was in its absorption capacity. 1 cup of dried barley, when added to soup, would absorb nearly 3 cups of liquid as it cooked. That meant a pot of watery soup, with barely enough substance to be worth eating, could become a thick, hearty soup that filled bowls and stomachs. That transformation happened without adding expensive ingredients, without requiring skill or technique, just by stirring barley into the pot and letting it simmer. Depression mothers learned to use barley strategically. When a pot of soup was too thin to satisfy the family, barley fixed it. When the soup had to feed more people than expected, barley stretched it. When children complained that soup was just flavored water, barley made it substantial enough to quiet the complaints. That problem-solving ability made barley worth keeping on hand, despite its 10-cent cost. The cooking process was straightforward. Barley needed to be rinsed first to remove any dust or debris from processing. Then it would be added directly to the soup pot. Unlike beans, barley didn't need soaking. Unlike rice, it didn't need precise water ratios. You could add as much or as little as you wanted, depending on how thick you needed the soup to be. That flexibility made it perfect for depression cooking where needs changed constantly. Barley took about 45 minutes to cook fully. During that time, it would gradually absorb liquid and swell, transforming from small, hard grains into plump, tender pearls. The soup would thicken progressively, becoming more substantial with each passing minute. Mothers could judge when to stop cooking based on how thick they wanted the soup. Less time for thinner soup, more time for something almost stew-like. The texture that barley added to soup was distinctive. Unlike potatoes, which broke down and became mushy, barley maintained its shape and structure. Each spoonful of soup would contain these small, chewy pearls that provided textural interest. That variety of texture made soup more satisfying to eat, made it feel more like a complete meal rather than just liquid with a few vegetables floating in it. Barley also had a subtle, slightly nutty flavor that enhanced soups without overwhelming them. It wasn't as neutral as rice or as assertive as beans. That mild flavor complemented vegetables and meat broths, adding depth without changing the essential character of the soup. Families who used barley regularly came to associate its taste with comfort and fullness, with soup that satisfied rather than disappointed. The nutritional value of barley added to its worth. It provided complex carbohydrates that released energy slowly, keeping people satisfied longer than simple starches. It contained fiber that aided digestion and helped prevent the constipation that plagued depression families eating mostly refined grains. It had some protein, some vitamins, some minerals, not enough to sustain life alone, but enough to contribute meaningfully to inadequate diets. Pearl barley appeared most commonly in vegetable soup. Mothers would make soup from whatever vegetables they had: carrots, celery, onions, turnips, cabbage, and add barley to make it substantial. The barley would cook alongside the vegetables, absorbing their flavors while contributing its own texture and substance. The result was soup that could serve as a complete meal rather than just a first course. Barley also went into chicken soup on the rare occasions when families had chicken. The barley would absorb the chicken flavor, making a small amount of meat flavor an entire pot of soup. One chicken, properly used with barley, could provide soup for days. That stretching ability was crucial when meat was so expensive that most families rarely had any. Some Depression mothers made barley soup as a main dish, using barley as the primary ingredient rather than just a thickener. They'd cook barley in water or broth with onions and whatever seasonings they had, creating a thick porridge-like dish that was filling and warming. This barley porridge could be eaten as is, or it could be cooled and sliced, then fried the next day, creating a completely different dish from the same ingredients. The 10-cent cost of barley positioned it as a considered purchase. It wasn't as cheap as dried beans at 6 or 7 cents a pound. It wasn't as economical as potatoes at 75 cents for 50 pounds. But barley offered something those other staples didn't: the ability to instantly transform thin soup into thick soup. That specific utility made it worth the cost for families who regularly faced the problem of soup that was too thin to satisfy. Barley stored well, which was essential for Depression pantries. The bag could sit on a shelf for months without spoiling. No refrigeration needed, no special storage conditions required. Just keep it dry, and it would be ready whenever soup needed thickening. That reliability made barley a pantry staple rather than an occasional purchase. Children who grew up eating barley soup had mixed feelings about it. Some loved the chewy texture of the barley pearls, finding them fun to eat. Others disliked the way barley made soup thick and heavy, preferring thinner broths. But personal preference mattered less than practical necessity. Families ate barley soup because barley made soup filling, and filling was what mattered when hunger was the alternative. The psychological impact of barley shouldn't be underestimated. Thin soup felt like poverty, like not having enough, like failure. Thick soup felt more substantial, more successful, more like a proper meal. Barley transformed soup from one category to the other. That transformation affected how families felt about their meals, about their circumstances, about their ability to provide for themselves. 10 cents worth of barley bought more than just thickness. It bought dignity. Today, pearl barley has largely disappeared from American pantries. We might buy it occasionally for specific recipes, but it's no longer a staple, no longer something every household keeps on hand. We've forgotten what Depression mothers knew: that barley could stretch soup further than anything else, that its thickening power could transform meals, that 10 cents worth of small white grains could make the difference between soup that satisfied and soup that disappointed. Bar of baking chocolate cost 18 cents and was the most expensive item on this list, but mothers saved for it because chocolate mattered. Real chocolate, not cocoa powder. Actual chocolate that could be melted, mixed into cakes, turned into frosting. That bar represented hope for better times, proof that some luxuries were still possible, evidence that the family hadn't lost everything. One bar could make a birthday cake that tasted like birthdays should taste. That was worth 18 cents. That was worth saving for. That was worth the sacrifice. Because sometimes the most important thing a mother could provide wasn't nutrition. It was the memory of normal, the taste of celebration, the proof that love could still be sweet even when life was bitter. And that's what baking chocolate delivered. Sweetness in the darkest times, hope in a wrapped bar, love measured in ounces. This is the last staple, the one that closes the circle. Because baking chocolate, like all 50 items on this list, proves something important. Depression, mothers weren't just surviving, they were strategizing, they were planning, they were thinking ahead. They kept these 50 staples on hand, not by accident, but by design. Each item earned its place through multiple uses, through reliability, through the ability to transform simple ingredients into meals that kept families together. These weren't just pantry items, they were tools, weapons against hunger, proof that intelligence and determination could overcome poverty, And that's worth remembering. Which pantry staple did your Depression mother or grandmother always keep stocked? Drop a comment with the food name and which town or state your family is from. I'm building a map of where these pantry traditions kept families fed through the 1930s. If you made it through all 50 staples, you understand something important, that Depression mothers were strategic planners, that survival. Subscribe for more Depression-era history. Next video covers how company stores kept families trapped in endless debt cycles with prices that made escape impossible. From Depression pantries to yours, don't let them forget what our grandmothers survived.